Alrighty, everybody. Hello, hello. Well, hey, fingers crossed, we are live, broadcasting through the airwaves to your ears here. And my goodness, hey, thanks so much, everyone, for coming to hang out with us. Look, we have a whole lot to dive into. I'm going to let maybe just a few moments for some other folks to trickle in. I'll do a little bit of air coverage to kind of keep us cruising, but I don't really want to dilly-dally today. We probably won't dive into the news. We won't be chatting too much about current events because we've got one heck of a story to share with you. But look, if you're looking for Tradecraft Tuesday, you are in the right place. We'll be chatting about OceanLotus, or APT-32, one of the advanced persistent threat hackers, adversaries, threat actors out and about, with a ginormous case study to bring to the table here. But with that, you know what? Hey, let's get the party started. Hey, I'll be super duper quick on the obligatory roadmap and agenda, and then we'll just do the, kind of credibility of like, hey, who the heck we are. But look, we're going to be getting pretty technical today. This is, to the truest sense of the name, Tradecraft Tuesday. We'll get a little bit of background context as to what we're going to be diving into, and then talk about a lot of the implants, the hooks and claws that this adversary OceanLotus used, in kind of really big kind of certain scenario and really the target organization here that will color the picture a little bit more, but then we'll dive into the malware itself, the attacker's infrastructure, and then hopefully the big picture, broad strokes, meaning and impact takeaways for you. We'll do a little bit of Q&A, but please, please, please let me say, look, we kind of want to do our best with this one, so we might run a little bit long. And look, I know that might not fit everyone's schedule. We'll be aiming for the top of the hour, but if we tend to trickle over, I don't know if it'll be, 15 minutes past or a half hour past. We just kind of want to do our best to bring it all to you the best that we can. So if you're willing, strap in, grab some popcorn, do the seatbelts and everything, but fingers crossed we'll have some fun. And with that, hi, hello. Hey, I'm John Hammond. I'm one of the security researchers here at Huntress, and I am joined by my good friend, and Greg, I'll let you fill in the gaps. I can sing your praises forever, but I'll let you do a little intro. Greg.
Thanks, John. I'm Greg Linares. Go by Laughing Mantis on Twitter, and this will be my first Tradecraft Tuesday. I'm really excited to be here, and I have a long history of being with threat intelligence, and here I'm the Principal Threat Intelligence Analyst at Huntress. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Now, I know we are the ugly mugs up here on the call, the conference, the little online get-together webinar thing. But look, let me let you know that we are not by any means the stars of the show in this case. Two of our other team members, Jai Minton and Craig Sweeney, they are some rock stars in the Security Operations Center, absolute wizards and geniuses. They're the real folks that dug into this. So truthfully, they are, hey, some of our international team members are out and about across UK, Australia, Ireland, all the folks that we've got all over the globe. And not the most conducive to, a live show with the time zones that we do here for Tradecraft Tuesday. So the conversation came up, hey, can we cover this? Can we talk about this cool stuff? And I wanted to get their blessing, their absolute approval. Like, look, this is your work, guys. Are you comfortable with us showcasing it? And like, yeah, that's fine. And I tried to be absolutely 1,000% certain. Like, are you sure this is your baby? And they said, yes. But please, 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 you'll hear us kind of screaming and shouting all along the way. This is really Jai and Craig's phenomenal work and the write-up that they'll dive into. With that said, there was a pretty massive blog and article chatting about this whole thing. And we'll color the picture on more of the context in just a moment. But if folks have not seen this blog, if folks haven't seen that write-up in that article, I know there is a heck of a lot to cover. And that's really what I wanted to showcase. By no means do you have to try to read this slide, but this is literally zoomed out the highest we can go and trying to get a capture of everything that's covered in that blog, write-up, and article. And there's a heck of a lot there. So Greg and I will do our best to capture all that within, again, maybe the hour, maybe 75 minutes, maybe 90 minutes. But we got a lot to cruise through. With that, Greg, would you mind kind of coloring the picture a little bit on how we can set the stage on kind of the impact and severity here for this organization? Because I think this one is a little bit special. It's not just zeros and ones, computer bits and bytes, but considering the impact of who is affected here, this kind of levels up to more real world stuff. But if you don't mind kind of cruising through.
Yeah, absolutely. So like usually when we deal with APTs and other type of cybersecurity attacks, they're going after data, they're going after critical information that they can sell and resell. Here, this incident is unique in the sense that the end goal of here was to identify individuals and identify people. So when this first hit our line, one of the things we made sure to look at was, could this affect the livelihood of individuals here? And we came to the conclusion that yes, this eventually could be used to identify dissidents and other individuals outside of Vietnam, and looking for them. And the organization involved is a human rights organization. So we highly suspect that the goal of this was to unmask individuals involved in that and where individuals are moved and located. So this was not a typical cybersecurity incident. This was actually affecting human lives directly.
Yeah, we had the subtext here for the title of the show, Defending the Defenders. And I hope that rings true because, look, they were, real people and real lives that could very well have been in the crosshairs for this. But I know we keep chatting about, advanced persistent threat, one of the elite, top dog threat actors, adversaries, and hackers. One thing I thought would be super valuable for you, if you aren't familiar, there is a really cool utility called APT Map. And I don't think I have a good quick link for you because it's through some GitHub pages and something out on the internet. But if you're willing to Google, if you're going to ask Auntie Uncle Google what APT Map is, you could track it down. But it's kind of trying to track, archive, and catalog a lot of these advanced persistent threats. But it's a super cool presentation because it's pulling data from MISP, from MITRE, VX Underground, a lot of the folks tracking, security threats and stuff on the horizon. But it's basically like a kind of Google Earth where you could see, clusters of those activities, those threat actors doing what they might do. And then if you were to click into one, drill down in, you could see a lot of different resources, some more insights, and actually seeing what they've been up to for Tradecraft's past research, observed activity, et cetera, et cetera. So if we were to take a look at that APT 32 that we're focusing on, OceanLotus over in Vietnam, there is a ton of info there, but I did at the very least wanted to present that to you for your awareness, maybe a sweet resource. But for us, in our real case study, we got a couple cast of characters here, things that we can kind of set the stage with, and the hosts, the computers themselves, the devices and endpoints that we really wanted to focus in on for the investigation. I think this is the best way to kind of get the story started, but there might be a little bit of complexity here. There's a couple moving pieces. Truthfully, we've got 4 different hosts, different computers, different endpoints that we will chat about. A couple of them have different impacts of malware, compromise, infections that we'll discuss. Some of them have less. So we'll cruise through them as we come to them. But please let me say, host number 1 and host number 4 will probably give us the most runway. We'll still discuss 2 and 3, but if you're willing to keep that in the back of your mind, host number 1 and host number 4 will be our leading roles, maybe some of the protagonists here in our cast of characters setting the stage. But Greg, I don't mean to keep rambling. If you're all right with it, I'd love to pass the baton to you to discuss some of the implants, those hooks, claws, beacons, like persistence mechanisms, starting at the start with host number 1. Would
Absolutely.
you mind getting us going?
Yeah, sure. So host number 1 is going to show you the breadth of what this APT group is actually scheduling out here and using. And the first one we're going to see is going to be scheduled tasks. And as scheduled tasks are a bread and butter of APTs, as well as implants, your core impacts, all the way up to your Metasploits and all those your advanced persistent tools that are being used right now. This is what they're going to use to maintain execution on reboot and continue to execute throughout the day. So the first one we're going over is just a simple one here. This is a WinScript with no logo, VBS, to execute with VBS script. And as you can see here, there's a path here. And it's going to be your path is going to be going all the way to a scheduler PS1 log.txt. Now, for those of you out there, this is a big flag for anyone, because as you know, colons is always an indicator of ADS or alternative data streams. And this is a way that you can hide files within other files and that are not normally present. So this is a huge red flag always throughout an engagement, or anytime you see these. This is not typically used, especially when it's coming to typical program executions.
One thing I did want to touch on here, a lot of this is truthfully an artifact that we were not able to track down the file itself. Specifically, that was removed by the time, hey, the Huntress agent was in the mix, actually giving us some visibility there. Unfortunate, but this hook, this setup and the structure is the same exact thing that Cybereason was actually chatting about. They've seen this, they've observed this exact same setup and structure. WScript, one of those living off the land binaries to roll through a alternate data stream. But did want to give them some kudos and credit. Yes. And you'll see this as a recurring theme. We'll probably be calling out a heck of a lot of other, hey, security folks and folks in the industry that have been seeing this activity, and really helps us gut check and cross correlate. But with that one out of the way, can you fill in a little bit more here on Java?
Yeah, sure. Also, going back to that, one interesting thing about this whole entire case is we were actually on boxes where attackers were actually moving. So that's going to be a theme throughout here. There's going to be files and opportunities here that we were unable to get because we actually watched the attackers start pulling out of the thing, and that was a very unique situation. And we're going to come across that later here. And we're moving on to, this is another scheduled task. This one's attempting to mimic Adobe Acrobat, or Adobe Acrobat here. And as you can see, this is going to be initializing Java with a JAR file and with a special parameter here. Yep, exactly. This occurred 10 days after we saw the initial access the initial scheduled task with the W script I mentioned above. And now this is going to allow a fake Adobe JAR to execute within the Java environment. And this parameter here, yes, it's going to show a reference to inside there. It's going to be a Adobe PNG file inside that JAR file, and that special parameter you see, the MI54 GIWP, that was actually a parameter passed to load a dynamic link library inside the JAR. So that's where we're going to start seeing these advanced persistent methods. This is not just a typical attack, and we were using all this kind of information to build out, hey, is this an actual APT? Is this an event that we need to, is this a normal attacker trying to imitate an APT, or just recycling uses of APT? And this is these are all going to be added up for evidence to show you that, yes, this is a new attack by OceanLotus. And this is one of those significant characteristics that they made a special parameter for this to call inside this Java file that was uniquely made for this event.
I know some folks might be thinking, like, what the heck? You're talking about a PNG image file, like a picture? How is that going to end up doing any malware stuff? We'll touch on that soon, but if you're willing, again, maybe a nugget you can keep in the back of your mind. And again, I know these are the simple scheduled tasks. We're kind of starting small here, crawl, walk, run, but there are more as we fall down the rabbit hole.
Yes. Now this one, again, this is WScript executing a Visual Basic Script, VBS, MS SharePoint here. And yes, this was designed to download a batch script from an SFTP server. Now this was really unique in the sense that SFTP is not always, it's not super common, but it's still, it's still a method that we've seen in the wild used. But they actually introduced a unique identification method. They used a key, a strict host key, and a client key that was just a client key in this. They used a client key to pass authentication to their C2, which was at base msstreamsapi.com. And they used that to validate that only this client could communicate with this SFTP server. And that allowed them to download this malicious batch file, cloud.bat, and then execute this with this persistence mechanism. And here you also notice that there's msshare.vba. I think that the thing they were trying to mimic here was msshare and don't know why they had VBA in there, which is interesting because that's a reference to Microsoft Office Visual Basic for applications. But that's just a little note that they had there.
I will add another caveat because cloud.bat would kind of maybe kick some other things off. But let me note, hey, this is still us kind of doing cat and mouse, trying to chase actors, trying to, hey, really dance and tango with threat actors as they were, again, moving files, doing things, operating on the hosts. So we'll see that cloud.bat kick off with more scheduled tasks every 5 hours. But that is just one puzzle piece as opposed to others that we would track down that even were present years ago.
Yes. So another unique thing about this was this had a mixture of old and new techniques. So this one, the fake update library was something that went back all the way to 2020, and that would be this, and that's going to show you that this is, I believe, that's going to be a link to this new COM object that we're about to talk about here. Yes, this issued a COM object that was DLL host surrogate, meaning DLLhost.exe is hosting an environment for this COM object to run inside, and which is essentially a fancy name for a DLL that has COM interfacing into there. And this was, another important thing this here is we say that this is going back, this file creation was actually scheduled back all the way to June, I think June 4th off the top of my head, of 2020. So this attack this is a persistent mechanism that was scheduled way back, and we were just coming across this attack in the middle of it.
To color the picture just a little bit more, I know we were starting small with, scheduled tasks and auto runs, the kind of classic cheesy persistence mechanisms that even like the early days of Huntress, we were, hey, that was kind of the flagship effort here, was to hunt down those hooks and claws. But the COM object or like component object model stuff are a little bit sneakier. Those aren't something, click and easy you can find in the graphical user interface. But if you were willing to drill down into like the Windows registry, you could see how it might hook together, again, a lot of those dynamic link libraries and DLLs. But this one was a little bit special, as now we're staging a COM object little hook and backdoor here. What is that cache URI.dll?
So yeah, we're going to have a long talk and discussion about this later. So cache URI.dll, which is not a normal name. That's I don't know where they decided to come up with that one, but this tool here, this DLL that they use is actually a legitimate Microsoft tool used for IIS Express for hosting web services, and it actually imports and runs another. This was actually a signed DLL by Microsoft, but it actually installs and runs another previously signed file, which we'll get into that detail. It's isutil.2.dll. This is where we started identifying and saying, okay, this is a little different than your typical attacks. This was one of those unique cases where they have many stages into this, and this helps them. The signing, as you know, helps them bypass certain checks in there where allowed, if a signed binary is trusted, therefore a signed binary has less restrictions by EDRs and other technologies are looking to identify. This was abusing a known signed binary to load a DLL that was mimicking another signed file. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Yes, we will take a look at that isutil2.dll, because that is when we can see more evil as opposed to the legitimate binaries and signed applications that are kind of just used to proxy the execution and hide and masquerade more of the nefarious tricks. But I think it is worthwhile to see other activity on host number one. While we were just looking at those auto runs, those scheduled tasks, simple persistence, we did get to see some actual processes ran, like hands-on keyboard, invoked, actual execution of different applications. Some typical like discovery enumeration techniques, whether it's looking at, hey, the privileges of the current user. I believe they shut down a computer at one point, maybe just to ensure that a new persistence mechanism would kick off. And then just trying to see, okay, what shares are available? What domains and what other resources can we access with some of the credentials that they might have uncovered there? This, I think, is, not to say cookie cutter, but more the norm of what we tend to see for, system administration commands. But those are odd, and at least enough to raise an eyebrow. And I think really a lot of the impetus for what Craig and Jai were digging into was like, why are we seeing these? And is it something we can kind of pull back the curtain on? Looking at, their IP address. This is kind of like boilerplate. Hey, you land on a box. If you're putting your hacker hat on, maybe you're doing try hack me or hack the box for a lot of the CTF enthusiasts in the room. Hey, you just want to get a lay of the land. But that's a little key indicator that we can help detect off of. And if I may kind of bring us to the end here for host number 1, there are just a couple other things that I think are neat, because we'll see other auto runs, these other startup entries that are still trying to pull off a little bit of a charade here, acting and looking like, or even genuinely maybe sometimes using the real Apple update or McAfee OEM module binary, maybe renamed or whatever. But these have previously been out and about with other conversations. I know I mentioned Cyber Reason previously, but ESET, Recorded Future, and other vendors have seen, these can be used and abused for some DLL side loading attacks, like having it naturally, normally, and just automatically load in another executable that could have whatever code the adversary particularly wants, if it's available and in the same folder or directory or in a path that it'll load in. That is kind of neat. Again, proxying execution to have just an abstracted way to hide some other more nefarious tricks from what would be legitimate real software. We also see more batch scripts that had the same functionality of pulling down stuff from an SCTP server, like the SharePoint.vbs script. But I hope you can kind of see a lot of the, jumping around from different languages, from different natural tools, from things that will segment and compartmentalize an attack chain. But as we started to get in the action here, Greg, I'd love for you to fill in the gaps on this one, because we kind of got to see the threat actors start to scramble. They're like, hang on. Someone is maybe exploring and seeing what we're doing. Let's try to do some emergency break glass stuff to get info out. But what was going on with this credential harvesting?
So let's set the picture a little bit. Like we were this occurred while we were installing. We identified this while we were this is a brand new client, and they were installing our software, and they had a previous EDR on hand, and the attackers, you'll see that some of these methods they specifically made were to bypass that existing EDR. So they didn't account for us to come in, install. And when that happened, we were able to actually watch hands on keyboard. And at one point, a threat actor was executing this. And as you can see, this is a command shell to enumerate the profile section of the Chrome browser. And they were attempting to grab cookies out of there and exfiltrate the cookies. However, in this individual's haste, you'll notice that the copy command is copy source destination here, and they actually accidentally overwrote the cookies file with an empty file at this point. And so they accidentally burned cookies here, and then they tried to grab the back file after this, and it was an interesting mess to watch them. And at that point, we isolated the host right after this. This was like the last command we saw, and we isolated that off the system, kicking the bad guy off there.
Oh, forgive me. I think you had a slide there to add a little bit more color, and I mistakenly did not drive us to it. Sorry.
That's fine. You're perfectly fine. This was to say also, this was interesting, because this command, if you run this command on a normal system that has only one profile by default, this will break. And the attackers did not take that into consideration. This account did not have profiles on it, so that also broke. So they had to manually start doing this in this case. Or the attackers did know that they had profiles from previous engagements and ran this. So this is a very interesting situation here.
Well, goodness, if you were keeping up, this is the roadmap of everything that we just tried to talk about. And these were a little bit of more of a visual representation of those hooks and claws, implants, beacons, scheduled tasks, auto runs, persistence mechanisms on host number 1. So there's a lot going on. And that was number 1 out of 4 before we dig into the malware. But I'll caveat, hey, 2 and 3 should be a little bit easier for us to cruise through because they end up being in line with, their access. We tend to see Cobalt Strike, one of the post-exploitation toolkits for continued access and wrecking havoc, doing damage. And we'll see that in hosts 2 and 3. But I do want to at least note some of the tidbits and breadcrumbs that we saw from host number 1. You saw the legitimate applications kind of being either masqueraded and just impersonating in some of their capabilities, like that fake Acrobat Adobe Reader, or maybe in some cases genuinely using the Apple software update or McAfee OEM module. But I think one of the more peculiar ones is that COM object backdoor. You don't get to see that a lot, and I don't think it gets enough love anywhere near as much as it should, because we're seeing a lot of e-crime actors and cyber criminals really kind of picking that back up. DLL sideloading, of course, in the mix, and those are things to, again, just kind of had an extra hop, something that is not as easily or at least readily recognizable as bad news bears, but more to drill down into. Mind if I keep going for host number 2? We can try to keep us going.
Go for it.
Now, host number 2 is not anywhere near as cool, as elite, as sexy, but it's one of those where we do get to see the Cobalt Strike beacons kind of in place. But this also has activity that we saw a month and a half later than everything we were just kind of drilling down into for host number 1. Now, these are the usual, again, discovery, enumeration, reconnaissance, using WMIC, the WMI or the Windows Management Instrumentation utilities to be able to see what processes are running. And they just slap that into a downloads folder with classic 1.txt, the calling card of threat actors here. Taking a look at other domain admins that might be in the list, trying to use NL test to get a better example and lay of the land of what's all about. And again, I'll note these are the kind of silly shenanigans of regular adversary kind of seeing what's out there. Typical enumeration and things that are readily detected with any detection engineering efforts. But Calibre.exe is where we see some things start to go sideways, because this is actually one component, the real executable for the ebook management program, Calibre. And that's odd to us because we see scheduled tasks creating, hey, every couple minutes here, actually using some other task name to run Calibre.exe. And this starts to end up working with other applications and executables, like some folks might be familiar with GP update, to like update group policy. That's weird because it's especially using the real actual GP update tool. But it kind of invokes and has a child process spawn underneath it where it attempts to do some privilege escalation with named pipes. And for some nerds and geeks in the room, some of you might see this and realize, that sticks out like a sore thumb. That's odd activity. And it's actually kind of a known indicator for a lot of those Cobalt Strike beacons and tooling. So let's note that, maybe Calibre.exe doing some process hollowing, herpaderping, all those silly shenanigans, and actually using GP updates to try to do some privilege escalation. I don't mean to get too far in the weeds on that, but I do think it's worth noting that Calibre.exe is looking more and more and more like the actual beacon here, the callback and agent kind of working with our Cobalt Strike. Unfortunately, we did get to see this work through some Calibre launcher.dll that we were not able to track down, again, in the moment, kind of trying to chase the adversary on the host here. But there were still some communications that we could see to external network domains. And I don't know if you remember that MS Teams app domain that we saw just previously on host number 1. It's not definitive. I don't think we can 1,000% certainty tie those two together, but mscloudapp.com, and where, that might have been communicating with our Calibre.exe. The domain, at least structure and schema, sounds in line, right? So host number 2, not a whole lot for us to drill down into, but looks like, one of those little minions, one of the things that it's working off of with Cobalt Strike. We'll see the very same for host number 3. And again, I'm just going to speed run us through it. Repeat Cobalt Strike Beacon. Out and about, another scheduled task, hooking stuff up with Calibre.exe, running a system. In this case, you might be able to see that run user here with the absolute privileges, all that power on the host. And that, once again, invoked by WMIC. Some folks might be thinking, oh, that old WMIC.exe and the command prompt cmd.exe days, it's supposed to be deprecated, but it's still going to be used. People are going to say, hey, Visual Basic Script and VBA apps are supposed to go away. Macros aren't going to be a thing in the Microsoft Office world. Well, they still are. And something to note. Unfortunately, we weren't able to track down what they ended up pulling together for the Calibre.exe itself. Would have been really cool. And Greg, I think you had a nugget on this one. Is like, OceanLotus and APT32 does some clever stuff with their Cobalt Strike. Is that right?
That's correct. So their Cobalt Strike is unique in the sense that it can be tracked back. And there has been efforts to identify their unique instance of Cobalt Strike. And so, unfortunately, the DLL there, the Calibre loader, is the one we were missing here. One thing I do want to add, that host 3 was compromised via host 2 in this case. It was used by a remote scheduled tasks in here. And so host 2 used their privileges to escalate, jump over to host 3, and that's where this came from.
But let's try to get to the end of this for literally the implants for host number 4. Now that we've got something to kind of go off of, looking for that Calibre.exe, that Calibre.dll in the mix, these are things that we can kind of keep looking for. And we did tend to see some other scheduled tasks, again, trying to fake or act as Adobe Update, Adobe Acrobat, Adobe ARM, blah, blah, blah. These were all just other copies of Calibre.exe with a different name. And some of them would, again, call back to C2, command and control, external domains, KPI.adc connect. We've got the IP addresses in here, but again, I don't mean to just keep piling on, indicator compromise after IOC, after network, after IP, after domain. I do hope that this starts to show you the big picture, though, and just how much they had in action here. Because remember, these are implants that we've seen from 2020 in some cases. And another tidbit where they start to use Node. Have you seen this before, Greg?
No. Well, yes, but not in an APT. So this method was really interesting. So what they did is they hijacked a Node instance and used the -e command, which allows it to import or allow it to load a secondary Node file. And so this allows them to do a really neat, this was actually really, really cool, that they had a Node add-on library that was designed specifically for this instance to compromise this machine. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but this is really cool. This was actually my first time seeing this in the wild used by an attacker. I've seen a couple of toolkits on there. I've been currently researching a lot of Node and similar hijacks and attack patterns and leverages. And this one was it was interesting to finally see it actually being used.
I did see a super quick question in the chat. Is that loading another file or a .node extension on disk locally? Yes. And I don't think we need to drill down too much, because ultimately that just ends up doing another Java malicious JAR and Java archive that we'll see in action very, very soon. Different name here, different class that it ends up calling to eventually get to another DLL, but msadobe.jar is kind of how that thing kicks off, and more scheduled tasks staging it. Let's keep that all in the back of our mind, because now we've got some weird capabilities with, way back on host number 1, IISutil2.dll, and some Java archives and JAR files. But I think that brings us to the end of the map of host number 4. What do you think, Greg?
I think so too. I mean, it was interesting to see how host number 1 was likely the initial compromise, and then eventually host 2 was compromised. Again, we came into this scenario later, possibly years later after this was actually being ran. And so we were not able to identify initial access. We have reason to believe that it was likely a browser exploit. So we had some evidence on there to believe that was a browser exploit years ago, and then that they were operating this and checking in, if you will. And then we came across this at this point.
All right. Let's dig into the malware. Now, finally, I know we didn't have a ton of visuals and screenshots and sexy stuff to showcase for that first segment, but now we'll get into the real hopeful, fun, and neat things. Remember that cache URI.dll? That was the legitimate IIS Express tool, like actual Microsoft signed binary for their usual packaging with like IIS web servers, etc. It really was a renamed copy of IISutil.dll. Again, native, natural, legitimate Microsoft tool. That loads the IISutil2.dll, but this is all coming to life because of that COM backdoor, that scheduled thing that we saw in there. I think this is where we start to fall down the rabbit hole, because IISutil2.dll is almost essentially the same sort of kinda of what was OG original IISutil1, air quotes, but it does some neat stuff. Could you help me kind of fill in the gaps here?
Yeah, so the first thing is that they bloated this thing. They fed this thing quite a bit of garbage data, and they gave it over 50 megabytes of size in this, and it was also patched. So the big thing here is the 50 megabytes is evading certain rules, YAR rules, sandbox rules that have limitations on file sizes. So by loading that in there, it automatically bypassed, or it was not being able to be identified by updaters or uploadings to sandboxes and YAR rules. So that was a simple bypass that they implemented. And the patching here was to have it execute different code there. And as you can see here, yes, perfect. And here it was, the value was changed from originally to 25 FB0 to 27 FB0. And that modified the entry point of this, and that allowed them to start. When we start seeing this is when we were like, okay, this is new, this is interesting here, this is not a typical pattern to do. They're modifying a signed binary, which is losing its signature. Keep in mind that this is no longer a valid signed binary, but in many cases EDRs only look at the originally signed clue, and then since it's padded with 50 extra bytes in there, most things aren't going to identify that this is actually supposed to be the original IIS2 anyways. So this update allows them to change the entry point, and then from here they were able to load a different function. I think that's to be yes. So exactly. So this new function was allowed them to start calling different code. The entry point address, and the address of the function actually was matching back the previous samples of VirusTotal that we were able to use, because they were using this file in the past, but back then they weren't bloating it. So now this new bloated instance allowed them to kind of use the same tool, but use it with minimal effort to update it to this current standard, this current campaign.
I think this is a neat tidbit, again, just kind of helping us tie it together to OceanLotus and APT32. We had seen Calibre.exe, we'd seen that IISutil2. We even saw some YAR rules kind of come to life for, hey, this looks like activity from that actor. But it wasn't extremely definitive until we kind of got to drill down into this one. And taking a look at some of those other binaries, just as you were mentioning here, Greg, what you could see on VirusTotal was either not packed or just having new data added on to the end. So looking at a hex editor, looking at, a little bit more of the binary contents. And you saw us in a disassembler like IDA or Ghidra just a moment ago to see the instructions and entry point and process here. But for the bytes, for the data and contents, they would start the very same, but now bloated and adding more stuff at the end. And you were mentioning about the patched tidbit, though, and that, hey, it actually has some other operations and instructions. Could you tell me more about that?
Sure. And again, this was all linking back to previous techniques that they used back when ESET identified their methods. And here, what they did is they filled the IISutil2 with some junk instructions and assembly code to do flow obfuscation. And what that's doing is basically, if you have dynamic analysis or static analysis that's going through these, static analysis that's going through these and analyzing code flow, this allows it to break up and not make it, essentially your analysis is not going to get from point A to Z. It's going to go to A, C, D, F, A, then to Z. And usually there's limitations on how much code flow analysis, static analysis goes through. So the object here was to basically run that counter where essentially, we're going to look for the first, 25 links after this instruction to see if there's anything malicious in that. If not, we're going to assume it's okay. And so what this was doing, it was doing that to break that, saying, oh, okay, after 25 instructions, we're going to assume it's okay. And it was just jumping around this code and then eventually landing into the malicious section here. Yep. And here, as you can see, this was used to do loading dynamically, DLLs for dynamically resolved APIs. Again, that is methods we use, or attackers use, to spoof ADRs, and when they sense it, they look for basically A to Z. This is, again, it's blocking that getting from A to Z location and allowing them to say, oh, I can get to this. They want to jump into their malicious DLL here or their malicious code section, and this blocks that. So this was actually observed by BlackBerry Cylance back in the day. And it was interesting because I was actually part of Cylance back when the first indicators of APT32 started going around way back in the day. And this was, I remember them when they first started using this method, and it was very novel at that point.
I did think it was kind of neat, though, as you started to see now the actual operations for the code that would run with the APIs that it's pulling back. ISUtil.dll would read in yet another file and artifact, isexpressshim.sdb. And that was kind of fake. That actually just had what might look like garbage, nonsense, and junk, but it is encrypted, so to speak. It's encrypted with a single byte XOR, or that exclusive OR of hex FF. And now that's better than nothing, right? It's not just leaving the contents out in the wind, but you, I don't know, tend to giggle and laugh. You see XOR used out and about for, hey, tradecraft and hackers and malware doing what they do. But again, maybe some crypto enthusiasts will be thinking like, hang on, a single byte XOR, that's not too elite. We could have done like AES or something, whatever. This is kind of cool, though, because now that it's extracted, decrypted, and got new data, it decompresses it with LZNT1. Have you heard of that? I'll admit I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
I'm not too familiar with it, but oddly enough, this is only, I've only heard of this algorithm being used in payloads. So ironically enough, it might be a good algorithm, but I've only seen it used in very unique payloads. And again, all this was to initialize another DLL stage for malware. So yes.
If you're still with us, if you're still following along, if you have kept up down the rabbit hole, this, again, next stage of malware or somewhere along in this chain. I know there's a whole lot of moving parts here, but this is when it starts to do some cool stuff. Because you remember that Adobe.png? You remember some of those references of an image file, and we're thinking like, what the heck? A picture, why would that matter whatsoever one way or another? That's not going to run malware. But what if you were to hide contents like other raw bytes and like the least significant bits of whatever byte across the file, or anything else, maybe in color values, RGB, red, green, blue, whatever it might be able to track down? The payload, the decrypted ISExpressshim.sdb that would unravel to be a new DLL, would now carve out logo.png and do some stego. Again, our capture the flag enthusiasts in the room, you might be thinking like, oh, okay, normally that's a stupid 100-point easy Stego 101. But when you see that in malware, at least in, the gamified environment of a silly CTF, you think, okay, I know what to do here because I've got the clue and the guidance of tracking that down. You don't normally get that playbook when you're looking at malware, unless you can read through the code, like, hey, digging through the disassembly as we've done. But that's kind of cool. Hey, tracking down another payload out of a picture, kind of sweet.
And it's a valid picture too. So yes, that was the interesting thing here. And yes, this was actually previously dug into by a security researcher back in 2019. And so to give a little behind the scenes here, when we were analyzing this and when this was going, I remember we didn't want to jump to conclusions to that this was OceanLotus. And so we had, we were identifying all these indicators. We're looking at the ways that they were being persistent, and they're doing BYOB, bring your own binary over that's signed and dropping it over and using that, and that's all typical of OceanLotus. However, the big red flag here, or the big thing that helped us, the smoking gun, if you will, was this steganography piece, in the sense that not only was it identical to a method that they used previously, they actually did use a steganography method back in 2019, but this was a brand new version of that was modified in such a way that this would be hard to press and to say that this was another attacker who was just following the playbook of this APT group. This actually took a lot of effort. This was not a simple task. This was actually a pretty complex component of here. Probably one of the most complex in this entire scenario. And this was designed to bypass a certain AV system or EDR system on host. And this was the reason that we were able to say, okay, this is likely the return of OceanLotus.
You did get to see that payload again, now having shellcode ran, executed through the PNG via steganography. This all kind of cooking back to that COM backdoor. Again, noting Calibre.exe. So a ton of moving parts here, but all the domains that it ended up communicating with, and others that we've seen, again, through others that have shared similar observations, that security researcher, ESET, Cylance, Cybereason, Recorded Future, everyone's seeing a lot of this stuff that will match, or at least look a lot like, legitimate domains. These all tend to be registered way back in 2017. And it seems like over time, the adversary or threat actor hasn't needed to change that infrastructure. They've always just about been one or these two IP addresses that would kind of rotate in and out of these different domains. I know we're all over the place here. We're driving all over the map, but look, if you are willing to kind of cruise through, and I know it's not light bathroom reading either, but hey, checking a look at Jai and Craig's blog, look, it drills down into legitimate Dropbox updater that again does some potential DLL sideloading, or at least forced to load in a DLL, more bin files with again more domains, more command and control, more external resources that it can use for actual access. And this is a dump of the memory as it was running. You could pull out some of these others, popfan.org or setals.com hosts and all there. I don't want to drag us down the rabbit hole any more than we already have, but I do think it would be worth at least mentioning those Java JAR files, because you remember that weird stuff that was either hooked up in a scheduled task or via Node and the Node add-on. Once again, another auto run. We kept alluding to this, but I did want to show it to you. The class name that it would call, and one of those arguments would call out and run a DLL, once again in the same directory. So holy crap, we were just stockpiling more and more and more ways to get other code execution with just a couple extra steps to abstract, hide, and shadow a lot of their activity. If you wanted to actually take a look at those other DLLs and the .bin files that it might have come in through with goop update.dll and .bin and all the others, this is neat though. And I did at least want to sprinkle this in. I know I'm a 1,000-foot view right now, but the mutex is here, and if you'd be willing to help color the picture on what you evil and nefarious stuff you can do with those, the real smoking gun here in my mind is that it's specifically going to target the system name and the username of, okay, who and what they were going after in this organization. That's APT.
Exactly. Yeah. So these mutexes here and this component here was literally built and compiled for these targets. So this is not shared. This wouldn't work on any other system. This was unique to these targets here. And that's, again, that's, as you mentioned, that is absolutely pivotal, or this is quintessential APT behavior there. And these, with these, they loaded, I believe, different user account information in here that was linked into that was on the account on this machine here. So what they were able to do is identify their environment, recon their environment, compromise this machine, and then later go back and make these components and put them on the machine at a later stage to allow them to remain persistent for long periods of time. And so this is also showing off that they were here for a while and they were able to be comfortable in this environment to the point that they were building out, there's effort level here. So that's another thing to talk about here is, APTs are actually ran just like software engineering companies. There's a manager, there's an environment here. So not only was this attacker at the point where they're comfortable here, they actually took cycles to build these specific binaries to throw into these machines to allow them to remain persistent over long periods of time. So that was essentially they had sprints for this. Their Scrum Master said, "Hey, this is great. We want a user story for this, and let's make sure that this environment is compromised, and we're here for a while. So let's go ahead and schedule some time for that."
Oh,
so
I love that. Agile development, APT cybercrime.
Yeah. You'll be surprised. So yes, that's exactly what this is trying to show off here, that they were here for a while. It was unique and it was specific to this environment.
Well, hey, if we have not already jumped off a cliff here, there was so much more to dig into. And please, if you're willing, take a look at that write-up. You can get more of the nitty-gritty raw details. Some cool ones, though. I think that honorable mentions, I want to at least sprinkle in. They did try to cheese and fake trusted platform module for whatever Windows 11, shenanigans that are out and about, hot topic now, and looking for other antivirus engines and security mechanisms where it would enumerate and try to see, okay, do we have those components, those services, or those processes running? And if they are there, hide, wait, lurk in the shadows for a little bit. And if, I don't know, Kaspersky or vendor and product XYZ ABC were watching us, it's going to circumvent and evade that here and there. Anything else I should sprinkle in on that one, Greg, or should we keep cruising to the info?
I think a little interesting tidbit of the TPM module was, again, this is to show off that they were there for, they did a research, was the TPM module had references to the actual hardware that this was. So they had they knew what hardware they were actually performing this on there. So there was a substantial reconnaissance done during this engagement.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, and I think we've got about 5 minutes left to the top of the hour. So we'll do our best to just wrap up, because these are pretty short sections for what we can talk about as the threat actor infrastructure. Keep thinking about those domains, keep thinking about those IP addresses, everything that we've tried to enumerate. But remember, we did note a Cobalt strike beacon. They were using that post-exploitation toolkit in the environment. If we took a look at those IP addresses and what it was actually reaching back out to, those are in line with the same kind of structure, setup, and activity, like behavior, if you were to try to communicate with that host 51.81.2944. Look, it's going to give you, hey, 404 not found, content length 0 with the classic flat GET request. But it's there, it's functioning. And that same exact behavior for Cobalt Strike team servers, kind of the multiplayer, hey, hacker HQ for however many different operators in a cybercrime op. Palo Alto and Unit 42 and a lot of those incredible folks documented and has shared and outlines that little response 404 not found, content length 0 for 200 GET requests, and some other breadcrumbs, paints the picture likely Cobalt Strike. And if we were to take that server banner hash, a little bit more of the insight, like fingerprinting that response, well, then we could look for other hosts, and we're using census here, maybe a Shodan equivalent for folks who might be familiar with that, to see what other computers out on the internet have that same functionality and behavior. Using that hash, using that fingerprint, we find about 7. But if we cross-correlate between the IP addresses that we've seen, that we got to uncover with all that investigation and that rabbit hole we just dug ourselves through, you can find maybe about 3 that match what we've seen. And 1 being the outlier that isn't something that we tracked before in the investigation. But I think that clued us in like, you know what? I think we're getting the big picture, and this is all starting to line up with uncovering and unraveling a lot of the OceanLotus tradecraft here.
Yeah, I think here the big thing here was they were trying to prevent people from identifying the server. What they didn't realize that it was actually providing a unique fingerprint for that system and able to trace back to it. So that was a huge break in this as well. Again, I really wish we could have got the Cobalt Strike module themselves that they had. They were absolutely removing these as we were analyzing these machines. They were actively removing them, deleting them, and removing these from systems as we were encountering it. So that is unfortunate side effect of all this. But yes, thanks to all these vendors, there's repeated tradecraft that they've been using. Again, this is painting all these methods here. I was the individual who was making the call on, if this was OceanLotus, and we had and Jai and Craig would absolutely did a phenomenal job going through this. And they came in, they were like, hey, here's all the evidence in here. Let's look at this. And this all came together to make sure that this was indeed a brand new incident of OceanLotus there.
I would like, and I don't mean to just foot stomp or emphasize or sound like a broken record here, but I really, really want to highlight a lot of that. Not hey, cross-community collaboration, just the information sharing and awareness. Just it takes a village when we're chatting a lot about cybersecurity. And it's not to say, oh, point fingers competitors or any of the folks out in the market in the industry, but like, no, same team, same fight. You heard us mention Cybereason, BlackBerry, Cylance, ESET, even Facebook, Velexity, tons and tons of these incredible folks that are observing the same activity. And that helps all of us get our head on straight when we're seeing weird stuff just as well. It all lines up. It all puts the puzzle pieces together, and it all tracks some of those tricks that we see in action. So thankful for the industry that we work in. With that, just about at the end here, man. I think we timed it A-OK. But what is your takeaway? What's your hot take, Greg? What do you think after all of this that we've just tried to steamroll through?
So, yeah, this it's always hard when cybersecurity incidents possibly lead to the loss of life or tracking of individuals, physical harm to individuals. I have a long history of working with incidents like that. The first one was also in the same region, the Southeast Asia. And ever since then, these ones are always hit hard. It's not just data going away. It's people being tracked. The area that this occurred in Vietnam, and it's a volatile region, especially in the last 8 months. So it's new changes in power. A lot of that is going on. It's really interesting to see. So another thing to shout out here was EFF. We made sure to work out with them, reach out to them so they can help people in the region identify that this might not be the only individual that they targeted. So we made sure to hand off these IOCs to them so they can help reach out and identify their groups out there and people who are doing the same kind of cause to make sure that they're safe. And I think that's a huge, like you put here, John, it's a really cool implant. But as you were going to say, what was the downfalls on here? Where did it lead you down on?
Oh goodness. So yeah, and thank you for, keeping the tone and cadence of look, the real people and real impact. I know I get a little bit in the weeds on the nerdy technical jargon and techno babble here when we're chatting about the COM backdoor, maybe a cool, tricky little tidbit. Alternate data streams in the mix, whatever we're piling in, that malware steganography, hiding stuff in PNG files to load DLL upon DLL upon DLL. It's like all this stuff stitched together and threaded out does make for what I don't know, trademark and call here an actually cool implant. Like that's kind of sweet. And I tried to ask Jai and a little bit of Craig when I got to get a hold of him. It's like, hey, what's your takeaway here? And I think they agreed is that like, look, this was sweet tradecraft, like cool APT stuff. You get a couple speed bumps and hiccups when they clobber all the cookies of Google Chrome. But what gave them away are those boring, basic, natural stuff like the system administrator commands, whoimi/priv, ipconfig/all, NL tests, looking at the domain and file shares. That's the dumb stuff, but that's so easy to kind of pick up on and see. And then it's a matter of having the context and having the awareness to do some threat hunting. Like to go beyond the dashboard, to look into it, to investigate, to interrogate. And then again, classic stupid Cobalt strike. We see that all the time. So when communicating and chatting, even just internally with friends and peers on this, we'd all be kind of laughing about like, wow, what a sweet, cool, hook stage implant attack chain they built up here just to do Cobalt strike and run a couple sysadmin commands. Just make us giggle.
Yeah, I guess the thing here is Cobalt Strike works, but the other thing here is that plausible deniability. So I think I hear in the long run, their plan, as you saw, they were removing their infrastructure, removing their infrastructure and their components when they were detected. So I think here is what they were planning for is in the event that they get detected, hopefully the people who detect them only detect the Cobalt strike, and they can remove their unique components later. So that allows them to have a plausible deniability saving grace in the campaign. However, we were able to act so fast that we were able to grab unique components of here and therefore allow them to do some attribution here in this case. But I never want to forget the aspect of plausible deniability. Especially when it comes to APTs and government-sanctioned activities.
Excellent. Hey, I did want to highlight, again, this is all the incredible work and phenomenal effort by Jai and Craig on the Huntress Security Operations Center and tracking down and chasing, with that threat hunting, with that context, with that awareness, to be able to look through this stuff. And we wouldn't be able to share this story. And I don't know, Greg, I had no part of it. I don't know about you, but I absolutely want to make sure they get the credit they deserve. This was their baby and their work. So please know that it's the other incredible team members that we got here behind the scenes at Huntress.
Absolutely. I got to personally shake Jai's hand at the. Unfortunately, I missed Craig, but I got to shake Jai's hand at our last meeting, physical meeting up, and it was great to just talk to him about this. And we had some great ideas to identify this and add detection and add stuff for our own product in here after this. So that was always the take back out of this here is making sure that we can identify these and we are able to later put this and provide to the community as well. They're able to identify and help for them to identify these attacks in the future.
Well, hey, I know we're just a little bit like 5 minutes past the hour. I think we did okay and hopefully not too late. Big thanks to everyone that was willing to stay again for the whole hour and a little bit after if they'd like to hang out with us. We will probably let our hair down, chill out, and relax a little bit. Hopefully it wasn't drinking from a fire hose too much. We'll do some Q&A and banter with you all, but I would like to give you a couple other nuggets. Hey, just for some other awareness, sweet stuff that Huntress is up to. If you'd like to have a chance to hang out with us, we do have some of the upcoming road shows. These are some live events getting together with other incredible folks with CyberQP, Fifth Wall Solutions, and sweet stuff, just to spread that awareness, just to get that education out, just to bring new info, new intel. Hey, threats that your clients might be facing in that managed service provider world, if that's where you're at. elevating, learning, seeing what other things you can learn from your peers, for other folks in the industry. It's a very, very cool community event. So please hang out with us there at the Huntress Roadshows. You can track those down at huntress.com/events. And if you're having a lot of fun with webinars and shows just like this, Tradecraft Tuesday is the show that we do every month, second Tuesday of the month. And coming up next in October, we're going to have a little bit more of those spooky stories from the Security Operations Center and just laughable, cringeworthy cybersecurity moments. Look, if you are already here tuning in with us, then you've got it on your calendar. You're already registered, and you can tune in on October 8th. Hope you get to enjoy and look forward to that. There are a couple other handouts just as well within the platform and call that we're in. You can take a look at some of the downloads for Huntress career opportunities if that's of any interest to you. I will also tease and sprinkle in our Huntress Capture the Flag for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is cooking back up again for the month of October. More to come on that super duper soon. But please, please, please take a look. Get some of those sweet downloads, resources on the handouts. And with that, should we do some Q&A, Greg?
I was looking forward to it. Yes. I think we have one already, and I think they're asking if APT 32 focuses on a specific industry. And yes, they're absolutely famous for targeting dissidents and journalists and human rights activists in the regions of Vietnam, Philippines, Laos, and Cambodia. That's absolutely their bread and butter. And they've been doing this for probably since 2014. And awesome. Yeah, love that. It brings up. By the way, this tool is rad. I just want to make sure that it's so cool. It's rad. I love rad tech, and this is cool. And it's simple, and it's really easy, and absolutely I highly recommend this. Also, one thing we failed to mention is that OceanLotus goes by plenty of names because our industry is terrible at standardizing names. And they also go by Canvas Cyclone, Bismuth, OceanLotus, Sea Lotus, APT-C00 is another one. There's so many names for them. Oh yeah, there's probably more in here. That's just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, so there's a whole Cobalt Kitty. Yeah, there's quite a bit. C Factor FOs. We really need to fix that in our industry. If I could fix one thing, that would be a goal for me. But yes, with that, is there any more questions? Anyone else have any questions?
Hit us with the good stuff. AMA. But if it's crickets, we can wind this thing down. Seriously, huge thank you all for coming to spend some time with us and hang out. I know we try to keep it casual, candid. We do want to just be spreading that education and awareness. I don't mean to be trying to cram product down your throat or make it in some ad or commercial. Look, if you're interested, you can track us down online. But I wanted to tell you a cool story. Hopefully get nerdy, get into the technical details. But my goodness. Okay, I'm looking at APT Map. Again, there are just so many different links and resources. This scroll bar goes forever. So that's a sweet resource for anyone that might be interested in it. I'll drop that link again. We'll give it a few more moments for Q&A. But with that said, hey, how many of you are tuning in to the Capture the Flag coming in October? Awesome. Thank you so much, Alpha, in the chat. I see you. Hey, cool webinar. Yeah. Hope to tell your friends about it. I'm happy to hear it. Thank you, everybody. And especially thanks to Jamie throwing us in the chat. If you'd like to track us down, hang out with us across the internet airwaves. I'm over on Twitter or X. Greg just as well. Please reach out.
I think the last thing is we're hiring. Make sure that everyone, if you want to join the hunt, please. I think Jamie has a link there that she can toss in. And also, yes, make sure to follow Jai and Craig. They're also on Twitter. Make sure to give them a follow. They're very, very bright individuals, and we're lucky to be working with them.
Sweet. 10 minutes passed.
Thanks,
we did it. Thanks so much, everyone. I guess we can tune out, Greg. This has been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.